Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Saturday, February 28th, 2014 episode of When Did You Wake Up with Erin Pizzey. I am, as usual, Erin's co-host, Dean Esme. Are you with us this afternoon, this evening, Erin?
Yes, I'm here.
I want to apologize to everybody. We had some serious technical difficulties as we begin moving to this new platform, so we missed last episode. So we brought in our guest, Jack Barnes. Say hello to everybody for me, if you would, Jack.
Hello, how's everyone today?
Jack's got a lot to tell us, but before we do that, we'll do what we normally do, and we'll talk just a little bit about what's been going on in whiteribbon.org, which I'm happy to report is currently the most popular White Ribbon site using the White Ribbon name in the world, and is still growing in readership, which is good. It takes no donations of any kind and puts out information that just about everybody in the world doesn't know but should, or what more people do. I'm stumbling a bit. Perhaps I should say what a lot of people know in their hearts to be true, but don't know that the science backs them up on it, which is that domestic violence is not a gendered issue. The last thing that was published on whiteribbon.org was 2 weeks ago today. It was by a lovely Australian gentleman, name of, I want to make sure I say his right, Tanveer Ahmed, who was a representative of the White Ribbon Australia organization. The White Ribbon Australia organization, unfortunately, is an ideological organization that ignores most domestic violence research and does not hold women accountable for child abuse, does not hold women accountable for abusing their husbands or their boyfriends, that merely concentrates on the hugely discredited, non-scientific Duluth model of domestic violence. Dr. Ahmed got in some severe trouble, some severe criticism in Australia from White Ribbon Australia. Since we don't support the work of and the way they misinform the public, we were happy to publish his piece instead on whiteribbon.org, or Erin was anyway. So I would like everybody to be encouraged to read that. Dr. Ahmed is right. We have been stuck in a 1970s era ideological feminist view of domestic violence for too long. Now, Erin, you were also telling me, and I don't seem to have it, but the administrators of the whiteribbon.org page do, that we've got a couple of papers that you'll be publishing on whiteribbon.org.
Yes, I mean, the first thing I want to publish, and it's already in the process, it's in the works to be published, is an introduction to the Duluth model, which is, as far as I'm concerned, an illegal attempt to bludgeon, brutalize, and cut men off from their children if men will not agree that they are guilty, whether there's any evidence or not, of violence against their partners. And this is I'm introducing a study done by Nicola Graham Cavan from Leicester University and her colleagues, actually taking apart the Duluth model and asking whether it's ethical, which it's not. I'm saying it's not legal, and I know, as so many people do, that actually millions of men across the Western world are going through and paying for these courses, and if they don't submit to what's happening in these courses, they are barred from seeing their children, many times forever again.
It's really quite horrifying. Programs that are set up to help people escape from abuse are actually frequently causing abuse.
That's the way it was set up, Dean, in the beginning, wasn't it? When it got hijacked. And the important thing about the Duluth model, I think, you see, I'm a child of parents who were captured by communists, and I know that exactly the same sort of programs, they were called consciousness raising. And men have to apologize on the Duluth model for being men. They have to admit to their crimes because of their privileges as men. And this is actually funded by taxpayers, Dean. You're funding this.
I know. Australian taxpayers are funding it through the transparently corrupt white ribbon organization in Australia. They're funding it in Canada. They're funding it in the United States. They're funding it in the UK. And it's ideological, non-scientific nonsense. And
Yes, but it's worse than nonsense because men are killing themselves because they're in a trap. If they're unwilling to admit to the feminist prerogative, they then have nowhere to go.
that's right. Essentially what you're talking about there is forced confessions.
Absolutely.
Under the
Absolutely.
worst kind of, what I would call the worst kind of torture. In fact, I mean that, the worst kind of torture. Because you can tie me down and waterboard me and peel back my fingernails and all that sort of horrible torture thing. I would rather you do that to me than you take my children from me. And so the very fact that they do this, they're not only abusing these men, they're frequently enabling the mother who's the true abuser in their relationship.
But to make it even worse, when of course, it's a double-edged fundraising business because not only do the men have to pay for this, but the men also have to pay for feminists to go and sit with their partners, and the partner, in many cases, has the right to say whether she thinks her man has improved sufficiently to see the children or not. Imagine that.
And of course, if she's being abused, or if she's being abusive to the children, that won't even be part of the discussion.
No, not at all. And if she's been abusive to him, she's very unlikely to ever let him see the children. It's a perfect way for doing it.
Now, in point of fact, we've interviewed people who are former feminists who used to do this professionally.
Mm-hmm.
Who was the lady that we had on as a guest a month or so ago?
Nicola.
Karen, yes. We published one of her pieces on A Voice for Men. Oh, we should have seen if whiteribbon.org wanted it too. Because she's a former feminist and a therapist who works with the domestically abused. And
yeah. And she's involved with me in doing this. We're basically not going to stop until we actually close down these programs everywhere.
And get them replaced with something that actually works or has a chance of working?
Yes, a therapeutic intervention. You are talking about men and women who have had childhoods of toxic violence and sexual abuse, who can't make relationships and need help to learn how to make relationships.
Exactly. So we're going to publish that piece of yours, and we've also got a piece that was published in a scientific journal by Nicola Graham Kevin, who we've also interviewed on this show, or maybe it was the old show. But
it was the old show, yeah.
But in any case, that was a peer-reviewed paper she published, and you've told me you've secured permissions for whiteribbon.org to republish that. So
absolutely,
everybody watch for that in the next couple of weeks. The whole notion that domestic violence is a gendered issue is going to start crumbling, folks. And those of you who've been around what we're doing on A Voice for Men, what Erin's doing on whiteribbon.org, and what the men's movement is doing in general, you're witness to changing history, guys. You really are. So, and what do we get paid for it? Not a bloody thing.
That's when you know you're working.
Yeah, and they're very angry with us. Some multi-million-dollar organizations are very angry with us. Too bad. They're frauds. We're not.
Yeah.
So, okay then. Now, this week we're going to have a very fun show and an interesting show. Sometimes we bring on, domestic violence experts, therapeutic counselors. I believe on our next one we're probably going to have a lady named Jasmine Newman, who is a counselor who used to work with anybody but now works and focuses exclusively on men. She's from down under. She's got terrific things to talk about. But today we're going to, and I'll just say it out, he's a friend. He was one of the volunteers at the International Conference on Men's Issues. He is the host of Blue Collar Red Pill Radio, an ordinary, everyday, average American working man. How you doing today, Jack Barnes?
I'm doing well. How are you, Dean?
Well, I'm excellent. So we'll just go ahead and start off the show with the standing question, and you and Erin can take it from here. When did you wake up and realize there was a problem in the gendered discourse?
Well, first, I would just like to say a thank you to Erin and to you, Dean, for having me on the show. It's truly an honor. Um, there is, like a lot of people you've had on this show, I cannot point to one specific instance in my life that was the moment. I've never been a feminist. I have never been blue pill. For a large majority of my life, I was what is known as purple pill, a mixture of the blue and red. But there's been just a series of instances going back to when I was 5 years old, when I first started going to school, that have stuck with me my entire life, that have shaped the way I view the world, that most of those instances can be considered red pill moments.
That sounds fascinating.
Why don't you give us an example of one? What's the first one that you can remember?
I can remember very much from the time that I started kindergarten in school that girls were sugar and spice and everything nice, and boys were to be watched and molded and shaped, and boys could do no right, girls could do no wrong. I remember being so angry at the fact of that the things that girls could do and get away with, I couldn't.
Can you give us an example of that?
And can you tell us how old you are?
Uh, I'm 34 years old. I started going to school in 1985. So an example of that would be simply talking in class. If two girls were talking in class, they were told to, stop talking and that it was time for class and that sort of thing. If boys were talking in class, they were scolded and oftentimes punished through, like, you're going to have to stay in from recess. You don't get to have recess today.
I was going to ask you, did you come from a traditional family?
In the sense of my family is intact, yes. My mother and father are still married to this day, still together. Traditional, yes and no. My parents are very, I guess you could say, moderate. They have some traditional views, some non-traditional views. My father was an owner-operator, independent truck driver. He was gone most of the time, and therefore my mother stayed at home with us and raised us, me and my brother. And that was partly due to a decision by them that if they were going to bring children into this world, it was their job to raise them and bring them up and teach them right from wrong and morals and values and that sort of thing. And another part is the area of the country where I live here in the United States. The economy was in very bad shape at that time, and there were not a lot of jobs for women outside of the home. Most of the jobs were heavy industry, farming, such sawmills, logging, that sort of thing that women just weren't physically able to do. And the few jobs that were there for women, there was a waiting list to get those jobs. So it's
So
a
in a
little bit
way,
of both there,
yeah.
of choice and of just.
But anyway, with your father busy earning a living, and she was on her own bringing up two boys. Thank God she was able to be at home, because you would have needed her. The thing that sounds good to me is that you had a loving, warm family.
Yes, as a matter of fact, my grandparents, my father's mother and father lived right across the street. So we were a close-knit family with my grandparents. So while my father was out earning a living, I also had another male role model in the role of my grandfather, who I was with every day.
I think that's
And
marvelous.
I had basically two mothers.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
fantastic.
it was a wonderful childhood.
Yeah. So when you were at school as a boy, you were getting into trouble because you were a boy. How did your parents take the fact that no doubt you got complaints?
Um, Most of the time, it was just staying in from recess or having to do a little extra schoolwork, and they never really knew about it.
Mm.
I didn't tell them, and the teacher didn't send notes home, so they never really knew about it. The couple of times that I did get in trouble at school, um, where my parents were notified that I had received punishment, my father and mother were they went up and talked to the principal and to the teacher, like, what is going on here? What is happening? And they said, well, they told me, said, well, you did this and this was wrong. And I told them, well, these girls had done X, Y, and Z. My father told me, you don't worry about what other people do. You worry about what you do. You can't control them, but you can control what you do. And it had gotten to the point to where I was so angry that I was starting to retaliate.
Yeah.
I was tired of putting up with it. Now, I didn't become violent in far as injure anyone, but I would tell these girls off and tell them what I thought. And it got to the point where I was doing the same thing to teachers. And my father and my mother were like, well, you can't do that. That's not allowed. Now, I had one teacher. I had actually had several good teachers in that school, but one of them decided that I needed counseling for my problems. I went to the school counselor, which basically acted like a therapist, and I had several sessions with her during school hours. And she basically came back and told the other teacher and my parents, there's nothing wrong with him.
That's
and so the counseling sessions ended. Yes.
So
yes,
so do you think that perhaps it was when you started moving into the outer world, knowing already that discrimination privileged women, that you began to experience what it really meant?
Yes, there's one instance that happened in high school, and I have a video about it on my YouTube channel. I was falsely accused of sexual harassment. I called a girl a name, supposedly, is what they accused me of, and I spent 3 days in school suspension, which is they send you to a different school, to a different building, and you sit in a cubicle by yourself all day and do your schoolwork that your teachers send you. You don't have any contact with anyone else other than the person who brings you your lunch at lunchtime, and that's it. You're basically, it's almost like jail. But I stayed there for 3 days, and the principal of the high school called my parents, my mother, and told her what had happened. She called my father. My father was 900 miles away, and he said, I'm going to be at home in the morning, and we're going down there. We're going to talk to this principal, and in the meantime, you call our lawyer. My mother called the lawyer, and the lawyer told her, says, well, if there's no person authority that heard him say this, they have no leg to stand on. My mother and father went in the principal's office, and they had a very heated discussion with the principal and vice principal. And at the end, my father decided, well, it's only 3 days in school suspension. This sexual harassment thing is not going to be on his record. And so we're going to let this girl have this one victory, because in 6 months he's going to graduate and he's going to be out of there. Now, that was what he decided should be done at that time. And Erin, I have to tell you that ever since then he's apologized to me for that. Every time it's brought up, he says, I wish I'd have made them get you out of that in-school suspension. That wasn't right.
Listening to you, Jack, I can imagine anybody who listens to this program afterwards who've had parents who have nothing like the integrity that you have, they will be deeply, deeply moved. It's wonderful to have such good, supportive parents, and as you know, it's fairly rare now.
Yes, yes. See, there was another boy who got caught up in the same thing. He was with me when this supposed incident took place, and the girl also said that he had called her the same name, and he, of course, neither one of us did. But his parents bowed down. They rolled over for the principal. Yes, we are so sorry that our son did this. Blah 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 blah. And my father called this boy's mother and said, I'm going down there to straighten this out. Do you want to come with me? And this woman told my father, says, no. As a matter of fact, my son is not to have anything to do with your son ever again.
Yeah.
They're not. I've told him he cannot be around him anymore. And my dad says, okay, if that's the way you want to do it, that's fine. But I'm going down there and fix this.
Well, thank God he did. So when is the next time, do you think, that you looked out and you saw that the world was a perilous place for men, particularly young men?
I got married, and my wife, her first cousin, she had helped raise this boy since the time he was 3 or 4 years old. This boy's mother abandoned him and his younger brother, and the boy's father, my wife's uncle, was working 2 jobs just to try to support them. And so my mother-in-law and father-in-law and my wife basically raised these 2 boys. And so at 12 or 13 years old, my wife became like a mother to these boys. And this boy grew up and got married to a woman who beat him and abused him emotionally and physically. And one night, he had enough, and she had him in a corner and was beating him, and he pushed her. She called the cops, and he was the one arrested and thrown in jail and had to take anger management courses. And that was one time that really set off red flags for me of what could happen.
Do you remember what the program was like for him? Did he succeed? Did he get through it?
We don't know. He cut all ties with us after that. I've never seen him again.
Why was that? Do you know?
He basically they had a child, a very young baby, and in order, I believe, I don't know this, but in order to stay in that child's life, he stayed married to this woman. He's still married to this woman to this day, and he does not have anything to do with his family. Because,
well, I can understand that, because she won't come in.
Exactly. And he has to do what she says in order to stay connected to his child. And I believe it is to protect his child from her. He is the shield for the child, and he has to do what she says. And of course, now I don't know this to be fact, but that's what I believe has happened.
I think you're very right. I'm sure that's what happened. And you know that we were talking about the Duluth model before the program began, and I think if you watch out, it'll be on whiteribbon.org, and I believe that's the program that he was on, and that will be a deal that was cut between the program and his violent wife.
Yes. I've been wanting several times to try to get some information to him, but he won't answer my wife's phone calls. He won't answer her text messages. He just ignores his whole entire family, except for his father. He does have some contact with his father, but other than that, no. So I wanted to get information to him. I just can't.
Jack, the most important thing is to realize that he is a hostage. It isn't that he doesn't love you or his family. The fact is, he is a hostage, and he knows the price of touching you, base with you, ever. Your only hope is when the child's old enough that the child will find you, and he will be able to come back to you. It's not that he doesn't love you and he doesn't care about his family. It's just that he has actually no choice as a responsible father. How many fathers do you think are in this trap? Millions. Millions.
Yes. Yes, it bothers me, but I only knew the boy for a short time before he got married, and um, this all this started happening. But my wife, it has really been because she feels almost like his mother,
Yes, I'm sure.
and
She was his mother.
it's really been tough on her. Yeah, yeah, she was, and it's really been tough on her. All this has happened to him, and not being able to help him, and then seeing him turn his back on all of them and not being able to do anything about it.
No, because if she understands, though, and I hope she listens to our program, if she understands not on lack of love from his part at all, it's the fact that he can't because he'd jeopardize his relationship with the child that he has to protect.
Yes.
If there are
And
no
so I
men,
think she realizes that.
yeah, and there are no men's refuges for him to go to with his child.
Hmm.
And he has been innocent, and an innocent victim of the radical feminist movement. That's the tragedy.
Yes. Yes.
How do you find living your life as a man in this present day century?
I honestly, for a long time before I became an MRA, it was honestly it was I thought I was the only one that saw this. I thought I was the only one that realized what was going on. And it wasn't until I saw one of Karen Straughn's videos that I realized that there are other people out there who also see what is happening. And through her video, I found other people like Paul's videos on YouTube, and I found I found the A Voice for Men radio before I found the website, and then that started me looking further, and I found a series by Man and Myth where I first saw his interviews with you, and
Yes.
I realized that this is something. There's other people out there that are like me that see what's going on and that are willing to do something about it. And for the first time, I felt like that I had a chance then to actually do something about it. Where before I thought, well, if I'm the only one, what can I do? But with the movement, with the men's human rights movement, I found brothers and sisters who are fighting, and I've joined with them.
You know, I was going to talk to you because I met you first at the Detroit Conference for Men. And I just remember saying to everybody, this is the warmest, most loving, most family feeling I have ever had at any conference. It was amazing. How did you feel about it?
Yes, oh yes, getting to meet everyone in person for the first time. You, Erin, and James Huff, Paul Elam, Karen Strong, all these people for the first time. It was just, it was like a family reunion of people that you'd never met.
Because I find,
It was kind of odd because I'd never met these people, but I knew them. It
yeah,
was kind of odd, but it was a very warm feeling.
actually it's interesting because the press that was there, when I read the reports of how they saw the conference, it actually bore no relationship to what actually happened in that room. But then there's another side of me that can imagine that for people who haven't been through any of this that you've been through and we've all been through, to see the conference made some of them, because they were, in a way, they were the part of the establishment by being who they were. It made them hostile.
Well, and also they were viewing it through their own emotional lens that they brought with them before they ever even got there. They
That's
wanted to see us as bitter, misogynist, as crybaby, whiny men, as whatever they wanted to label us, and they had that preconceived notion before they ever got there.
and boy, did they get a surprise when they got there, and that's probably what created the hostility.
Well, yep, that's probably part of it. Another part of it is that through that lens, they rejected what they didn't want to see, and they saw only what they wanted to. I think that's another part of the reason hostility is there.
I've been thinking really a lot of the time about what it is that we could do to get the news across to people that domestic violence has never been a gender issue. It's been a huge fraudulent lie. And you have to be quite involved in the politics, don't you, of the history of the women's movement to actually understand what's really going on.
Well, where I live, you say the word feminist, and a lot of people don't even know what a feminist is. And if they do, they think of the stereotypical bra burning, hairy legged, lesbian, that sort of thing. But you tell them that domestic violence is men beating on women, and they'll say, no, that's not true, because I know so and so over here, his wife shot and killed him. I know so and so over here that his wife beats him, or all this kind of stuff. People know that domestic violence is not a gendered issue, but what they do not realize is that the establishment, the people in positions of authority in the domestic violence industry, are painting this as a gendered issue. The people around here don't know that. They don't realize that. So it's a gap of you have the common knowledge of this, but these people in power, they don't know that, or they know it, but they're ideologically driven. They're driven. They're just greedy, wanting money, so they spin this narrative of it's just men beating on women, and that, or at least around where I live, that's the message that you've got to get across to people.
So even where you live, are the police also contaminated with the feminist ideology?
Yes, they are. But it's again, there's a gap there between the police departments and the citizenry. The citizenry does not realize the police departments have been trained in this way. Because when my wife's cousin was arrested, while they had him on the ground, they put the boots to him and sort of roughed him up a little bit before they took him to jail, because they thought he was his wife had called and said that this man's abusing me. Well, he must have been. So that people don't. It's just people don't see what's going on. They don't understand what is happening.
It's a great tragedy, actually, and all we could do is what we're doing now. How do you live your day-to-day life, knowing that now you are officially a misogynist?
Really no different than what I lived it before, because honestly, when I talk to people about this stuff, they agree with me a lot of the time. They've all, as you've said before on your past show, women know how women can be.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of men know how women can be as well, but it's just one of those, like a saying that I've heard many times before: the emperor has no clothes. Everyone knows it, but everyone doesn't know that everyone else knows it.
What do you think we can do? What do you think we can do to get the message out to a very broad audience? You have your radio
The only
show.
thing that I know of we can do is, yes, the only thing I know of to do right now is to keep doing what we're doing and keep growing, and eventually one day we will have. We're seeing articles in the mainstream media now about the men's human rights movement, and about the issue that men face domestic violence as well. That men are victims as well. And I think as we continue to grow and we continue to work, that will increase, and then that in turn will educate the public.
So in a way, sorry, go ahead, Dean.
I think that in a way is basically what we've had to figure out is that you have to speak out, and you have to do it in a way where you're simply not shamed into silence. And so it requires a little toughness and to just keep doing it, because we're seeing the growth, and it's it's exponential. It's like compound interest. You see, compound interest. You put a pound in the bank and wait, and it doesn't look like anything, but then years down the road, it's grown into something significant, and that's what's happening now. One of the things I've noticed, I know I'm getting on a pedestal here, but I've noticed that the men's rights movement gets more press today than it has in its entire history. And feminists are on the defensive everywhere, and there's a reason. And part of it is us and what we do through whiteribbon.org, through A Voice for Men, through our friends at Honey Badger Brigade, through our radio shows, through whiteribbon.org. We just have to keep doing it with the assumption that we need to be patient. The battle to end slavery was 400 years long. And I'm not saying this is exactly like the battle to end slavery, right? But I'm just, sometimes movements take a long time. And as long as we don't shut up and as long as we keep working, things will change. This may seem like a heavy-handed segue, but one of the neat things about the International Conference on Men's Issues last year, and I expect a similar experience this year, is actually just getting to sit around and not just listen to speeches, but to get to know people. And Jack, as I recall, you were in a particularly interesting situation since you volunteered to drive people around, so you got to sit in the car with a lot of people, didn't you?
Yes. I got to pick Warren Farrell and his wife up from the airport. I got to, for about a day before the conference, I got to drive Paul around to different places and do different things and spend a lot of time with him. There was just a lot of people. I got to go to lunch with Erin and Senator Ann Cools, and I sat right beside Senator Cools and had lunch. And to my right was a guy that I didn't know. I knew who he was, but I couldn't figure out who he was. I couldn't remember, and it turned out that it was Dan Moore. It was Factory, and I just sit and had lunch with these people. It was really an awesome experience.
I remember you telling me a tragic tale. We were in a car at some point, and you were talking to me. I did want to ask you about it, because unless you just don't want to talk about it, but it was a very riveting story. I've heard others like it, but still, about a friend or acquaintance of yours who was in the midst of getting a divorce or something and did in fact suicide. Do you remember the story I'm talking about?
Yes, I remember it very well. Before I started driving a truck over the road, which means being gone every night from home, or nearly every night, I worked for a local scrap metal company, a recycling company, and drove a truck. And I was home every day, or every night. And one of the guys that worked there, also driving a truck, he and I got to be really good friends. Now, this is the type of man that if you're around him for 10 minutes and you're not laughing, holding your doubled over, holding your stomach, laughing so hard, because this guy was just a comedian. He was hilarious. If you're not holding yourself laughing after being around this guy for 10 minutes, there's something wrong with you, because he was just that funny. He was a great guy to be around. And we worked together for a while. Eventually, he went on to do something else, and I went on to do he went on to drive a truck for another company over the road, and I went and bought a truck and went over the road. And we sort of drifted apart a little bit. But he was married. He had a son living with him from a previous marriage, and he had two other sons with his new wife. He went to work for this other trucking company where he was making a lot more money, but he wasn't home, but except for on the weekends. And he made all this money, and he bought this big, nice house and everything, and moved his family in. And his youngest son had just started kindergarten. Well, his wife was sitting there at home with both the kids in school and doing, the little bit of housework that had to be done, when there's not hardly anybody there. And she said, I think I'd like to take a job, and just some little part-time job, just to make a little extra money on the side, just for me to spend on whatever I wanted. He said, that sounds like a great idea. If that's what you want to do, go for it. She started work at a tanning salon, and she one of the girls working in the tanning salon was the daughter of the man who owned it, and she was also in college. Now, she was out every night drinking and partying and having a good time. This woman was going home to 3 kids and, just the daily drudgery of life, right? And she saw all the fun that she could be having if she didn't have that baggage. And so she started hanging out with this girl and started going and partying with this girl, and eventually she started having other relationships with other men rather than her husband. Her husband found out about this and confronted her, and she basically told him, I'm an adult, I can do what I want to, you're not going to tell me what to do. As a matter of fact, you can pack your stuff and get out. We're getting a divorce. This went on for 2 or 3 weeks there of the divorce. The beginning stages of the divorce. He moved in with his parents, and one weekend he came home. He went and picked up his sons and went and spent the day with them. He dropped them back off at his parents' house, and he went to the tanning salon where this girl worked, where his wife worked. Now, the story, this part of the story is a little bit convoluted. I've heard 2 different tales. One, he walked in and took a pistol and put it to his wife's head, laid a note on the counter, and then stuck it in his mouth and pulled the trigger. And the other one, he just walked in, laid a note on the counter, and put the pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. I happened to be home for the visitation before the funeral. The visitation was on one day, the funeral the next, and I could not attend the funeral, but I got to be there for the visitation. I went in to the funeral home. I talked to the guy's mother and father, and I viewed the body, said my goodbyes, and I walked over to where his wife was sitting. She was sitting there playing on her phone, texting or something, and she looked up at me and had this look on her face like, what do you want? And she didn't know me. She never met me. And she just, the whole time I was there, she was acting like she had other places to be, that that this was just an inconvenience to be there. I stood there and just stared at her for a good, 45 seconds, a minute, and then turned around and walked off. And on my way out, his 3 sons were standing by the door. The youngest one didn't really understand what was going on. He was too young. The middle one knew what had happened and understood it, and he was crying. And the older one, he was about 15 years old, was trying to comfort the middle one. I could not say anything to the smaller boys other than to tell them that, and he talked about them a lot and that he loved them very much. Dean, what bothered me the most about this whole experience is I looked at the oldest boy. I shook his hand as if he was a man and told him that I was sorry. Dean, the look on his face was nothing but pure hatred. The saying is that misogynists are not born, they're created. He hated his stepmother, and it was a few days after that he moved out and moved in with his grandparents, and his stepmother tried to stop him, and he turned around and looked at her. He told her, he said, if I ever see you again, I'll kill you, and walked out the door. And that not just the fact that my friend committed suicide, that was bad enough, but seeing that boy's face was also just terrible. What had happened, he was going through, and yeah, I really don't know what else to say about it.
All I can say is I hope and pray that he meets some good women in his life, so that understandable feeling of this omnipotent stepmother who created the conditions that in the end killed his father is not the only influence that describes his life.
Yeah, well,
I hope you're right.
truly, he is the responsible party for pulling the trigger, and choosing to end his life. But at the same time, I'm often aghast by how little sympathy men get when they're in such horrible psychic pain that it seems the only way to relieve it is to die. And yet, people don't ever seem to wonder, to question what might we have done, or what might we do to make this less common. But it's like, well, the guy killed himself because his wife was cheating,
Yeah.
and oh well. I don't know. Do you understand? You know what I mean? There seems like there's an indifference that really bothers me.
But the thing with us in this country, just recently there's been a spate of newspaper articles about how fast the suicide rates for men are still climbing. And every time this article comes out, instead of looking for anything else, it just says, well, men are drinking more, men are not having that many jobs. It never, ever describes the real reason for suicide for majority of men is the fact that they have lost their children, their homes, their futures, and they have nothing they feel to live for. Is that the same in America?
When my friend was laying,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, we have the articles about veterans committing suicide, but as far as just men in general, not very much. It just seems like nobody cares. But when my friend was laying there in that coffin, the casket, and I walked up there and I looked at him, half of me wanted to hug him, just to hug him as a friend, and half of me wanted to just slap him across the face for doing something so stupid. Uh, and it was a mixture of emotions there, of anger at him for what he did, and a sense of pity and sadness for what he had been going through. He realized that he was fixing to lose everything. That he was going to lose contact with his kids, every other weekend. It's what he's going to get to see them. He was going to be paying for that brand new house that he could barely afford to pay for to begin with, but not be able to live there. He was going to lose his wife. He was going to lose everything, and he just couldn't handle it. And that that was that was not necessarily a red pill moment for me. Neither was how his wife acted, because I know how some women can be. I know that there are some women out there that are some of the most cold-hearted people that you could ever meet. I've never lived under this illusion that women can't be like that, but it just had it reinforced for me that that there are those women out there. I knew they were, but I'd never been actually confronted with one until that day.
Well, the truth of the matter is that they are out there, just as men can be equally evil. The real problem of it all, it goes back to generational family violence. So whatever happened to that woman who was so cold and so bitter and so unable to prioritize the fact that she had children, let alone, if you love your children, you don't go out dancing with other men. You simply don't. And the problem we have is educating the public into understanding that men are human. Men bleed. There's a kind of strange feeling that I come across, which is that whatever happens to men, it doesn't really matter, because now, with women so firmly in the saddle, men are redundant. They've certainly been made redundant. I mean, the political attitude towards family life is that the family is now women and children.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would say that also male suicides are prompted by this thing, but nobody I would disagree. I think that a man going through a divorce, that's a huge sign right there. That's a huge risk factor for suicide right there. And then I would be willing to bet that the majority of male suicides, though, are somehow family related, somehow related to losing a job, losing a home, losing all hope in life. And there's no faster way of doing it, that's for sure, than being abused by the family court system. And it's got to be changed. I mean, mothers, do you have sons that you care about? Do you have brothers that you care about? At some point, we should be asking these questions.
It's a huge mountain to climb because the octopus tentacles, if you like, of this movement that has set itself up to claim that men are virtually the originators of all problems in our society, and that if we exempt men from any human contact, the world will be a far, far better place. And it's going to be difficult, but we will get there. It's being able to get people to listen, and to listen quietly, and also to begin to tackle the corrupt family courts. In England, and I think it's not quite the same in America, but in England they're absolutely secret. Nothing can come out of the family court, and if anybody tries to break the silence, they are then guilty of contempt of court and can be jailed. Is that the same in America?
No, it's not, although it's a growing trend to have secret trials for certain things, like you can get something called an ex parte restraining order, whereby you have a hearing with a judge, and you can go in as a woman and say, I am in fear that he's going to beat me. He does not even get to show up. He doesn't even get notified that it's happened. He simply gets slapped with a restraining order, and then, after the case, because he wasn't there to defend himself or say anything, he didn't even know. And then after the case, if they can find a way for him to violate the restraining order, which may be something as simple as him impulsively going to try to talk to his children, they can put him in jail for violating the restraining order. And this all happened as a result of secret trials. And I know that in Canada, there's moves toward making the family courts more and more secretive. Because we're in the United States, on A Voice for Men, we've published a few things that Canadian courts ordered banned. So no Canadian publication could publish it, but we did. And by the way, I guess I'll put this out there in the waters. If there's anybody who's got stuff from UK courts that they'd like to see published, please send it to avoiceformen.com, specifically my first name at avoiceformen.com. I will happily defy any UK judge and tell them to come and get me from where I live in Michigan. So, sorry, that was a bit of a change of subject, but I'm putting it out there now. We hear anything about these secret courts and somebody wants to smuggle a document out of the UK, we'll print it. So anyway.
Would the person who then sent it to you, would there be any way of tracing that document? Because what would probably happen if that man or woman was found, they would be jailed.
Well, it really depends, because on any given case, there would be multiple parties who could certainly get us the information, and we would never divulge where we got it from.
Okay, that's a good reassurance. That's a good reassurance.
Under no circumstances, I will go to jail first, and I'll be happy to let them haul my ass into jail. Under no circumstances will I say where I got something like that. So there you go.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is the definition of FTSU.
What's FTSU?
Oh, it's one of our crass slogans. Fuck their shit up. If a British judge wants to try to bring me to London to face criminal charges, by God, let her. And I'll say no, and she can kiss my Yankee butt. So there. Now we've gone just a little far afield, and we are fairly near, but the offer is sincere. Do you guys have any final thoughts for us? We're near our end here.
My final thought is... go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Erin. Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say thank you for having me on your show, Erin. It's been a pleasure and an honor. It was an honor to meet you. You're a woman who has been there, done that, and got the T-shirt is kind of a saying we have here. All your work you've done before I was born. You were fighting for my rights and fighting for me as a man before I was born, and I can't thank you enough for that. And it breaks my heart all you have been through, all the feminists have done to you, but it also at the same time you're a role model. You're one of my heroes, and I know that's kind of corny, but it's the truth. It's the truth. Thank you.
I'm very glad. It's so sweet of you. And I must say, I come to Sevier very regularly in Tennessee because my sister lives there. And you have a beautiful, beautiful area. And I think of you when I first met you and I got down to Sevierville, I thought about you up in near Memphis and thought, wow, I'm going to one day catch up with him. And here we are. Isn't that marvelous?
It is. I look forward to meeting you again. I hope that you can make it to the next conference, and I would love to be able to sit down and talk to you again.
Even if I can't, I'll be with you in spirit and on Skype. So there's a promise. So we'll get to speak, okay?
Okay. That's a deal.
All right. Sounds good. All right, everybody. Next week in the same time slot, as per usual, we will have Tales from the Infrared, where we'll be talking about geek culture, video games, and Walking Dead, and Game of Thrones, and all the latest happenings with Gamergate and all that good stuff. In 2 weeks, we're not 100% sure, but we're probably going to have Jasmine Newman, a counselor for men from Down Under. Thanks, everybody. See you later. James, you want to take us home?